You doing well? We are in Proverbs 3, so keep your Bible open if you got it there. And here, let me just read the first sections of this again. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Turn away from evil, and it will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. So here's kind of the hard reality of being a human being, is that you are going to have to place your trust in something. You're going to have to trust something with your life. And so the question isn't whether you will trust in something. I think some people have this idea of like, well, I just don't trust anything. But you will. You have to entrust yourself to something, place your trust in something. Everyone does. The question is, what are you going to put your trust in? And your life will unfold largely as an answer to that question. If you ask the person, what does this person trust? Really, your life is essentially an answer to that question. And the marker of a wise person, and this isn't even just biblical, this is like across the world, like the essential assessment of what makes someone wise is that they only trust in trustworthy things. It's actually the primary way we describe someone who's wise or unwise, right? If this person is like, stepping out onto a bridge that is like very old and rickety, and there's a sign that says like, don't trust this bridge, and someone's like, I'm going to trust it, and the bridge breaks, they'd be like, that was an unwise person. Why? Because they placed their life, they trusted in something that was untrustworthy. We have some kind of cultural warnings about where to place our trust. One of the common phrases I've heard is this, never trust a skinny cook. You guys heard this? Never trust. So if I come to my house, don't trust what I'm cooking up. You want a fat chef, right? We kind of know this broadly. Why? Well, it's because they're trustworthy. Now, I was in China for a number of different years, and we spent a bunch of summers over in China, and you'd always try to figure out like where are the restaurants that are the best restaurants. And I have to tell you, this way of seeking wisdom proved very true in China. Our favorite restaurant in China was a little area kind of close to our apartment, and let's just say the chef was extremely trustworthy, okay? He was, but we had this hilarious relationship. We went back and forth, like, he knew hardly any English. We knew even less Chinese, and we'd kind of go back and forth. And we'd bring our friends, our Chinese friends that we made, we'd bring them to this restaurant. And because we had this like really fun relationship with the chef, like he'd come out from working in the back. And if you've never been to China, when Chinese men get super hot, like they just pull their shirt up here and their belly just hangs out. It's just like totally culturally normal there. They're just like, I'm hot, so my shirt's coming up. And so he'd always like come out of the kitchen like that, just like full belly on display. And he'd like be like patting it and stuff. And like, there's no way he like washed his hands after that, But he'd come out and we'd have our friends there, and we'd say something like this. We'd say something like this to our friends. We'd say, 这是我的朋友, 这饭很好吃. We'd say that. And my tones are really bad, so if you know Mandarin, like, don't make fun of me. But basically what we'd say is this. We'd say, this is my fat friend. His food is delicious. And they were like, oh, this is awesome. And he'd be like, oh, haha, this is amazing. And we'd laugh. And some of you are like, I can't believe you called this guy fat. And I just want you to know the reason that you're worried about that is probably because you're very American and very white. Okay, here's the thing. If you go over there, they just say it how it is. It's amazing. Like whatever's the most true thing about someone physically, they're just totally okay to throw it out there. You'd be like, hey, this is my friend over there. And they'd be like, is it the ugly one? And you'd be like, I guess so. Like you're right. It is actually, that's the one I'm talking about. I remember I was on an overnight train one time, and I was hanging out with this just large Chinese family, all in these kind of bunk beds on this overnight train, and that's how they get around over there. And I was just on one of the bunks in between this whole family, right? And at night, one of the little kids is talking to me, and he's kind of trying out some English. I'm trying out a little bit of Chinese, and I'm talking to him, and I said, hey, my name is Da Wei, which is kind of like Chinese version of David. I was like, hey, my name is Dawei. And Da in Mandarin, it also kind of means big, like how you pronounce it also means big. And so I said, hey, my name is Dawei. And he said, no, your name is not Dawei. Your name is Dabiza. And so what he said is this, no, your name is not Dawei. Your name is not David. Your name is Big Nose. That's your name. And this kid's like 8 years old, and I was like, wow, okay, yeah, I have a gigantic nose. And he's like, that is now your name. That's what we're calling you the entire rest of this train ride. So anyway, trustworthy culture, all right? You go over there, you're trying to figure out like what really about my body's a little off. They're like, they will tell you immediately. Okay, so trust. You're gonna place your trust somewhere. The question is, what are you gonna place your trust in? And this isn't just true of like restaurants or what people say about you. This is true with your life. You are going to have to entrust your life to something or someone. The question is, where are you gonna put your trust? And here's how Proverbs 3 kind of begins. It says, you need to trust in the Lord with all your heart. So where do you place your trust? In the Lord. How much of your trust do you give to him? All of it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. It's the first thing he wants to say. You know, the Proverbs begins by saying that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And we talked last week about this. Like, we're so self-focused. We're so kind of internally looking in that we need this powerful encounter with something bigger than us that can kind of lift our eyes off of ourselves, and we begin to worship God instead of worshiping us. And so we need this fear of the Lord, this fear that draws us out in worship. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but the fear of the Lord, it looks like something as we walk the path of wisdom. And I think the fear of the Lord is the beginning, and it's kind of the climactic thing that draws us towards God. But the way we live this out, I think, is with the word trust. We trust in the Lord. And this is, I think, a very hard thing to do, to trust in the Lord with your entire heart, because we live in a world that has taught us to never give your whole heart to anything. And it's interesting, much of the wisdom of the world, this is actually the central piece of wisdom. It'd be never entrust yourself fully to anything. In climbing, this is true. I'm a climber. I used to climb a lot more than I do now because I have 3 small children. 1-year-olds climb short things, not tall things. And so I remember learning how to build anchors out in an alpine climbing environment. So when you're climbing in a gym, it's easy. The rope's attached up there. You hook in, you climb up and down, fine. But when you're actually out in the mountains, you have to basically create your own protection. And so what happens is when you're climbing up, you're putting different pieces of gear in. Let me just show you one of these real quick. This is the very first time I've ever had an illustration, and I actually have something for you, okay? You know what this is? Yeah, it's a cam, all right? Anyone ever seen one of these? Okay. Raise your hand if you've never seen one of these before. Yeah, most people haven't. I hadn't until I started climbing. Basically what happens when you're climbing is you're holding onto the rock with your hands or with your feet, but if you fall, you don't want to just fall to your death, right? Generally, that's not a good plan. And so what you do is you take one of these and you put it in some constriction in the rock. You put it in like a crack. So if you're climbing up a crack, you take this thing, it's pretty interesting. You pull this down, and then you put it into the crack, and then as you pull down on it, it pushes against the sides. And so essentially, if you put this in a crack and you do a good job placing it, you can take a 60-foot fall on this thing. Like, this is a really, really strong mechanical device that will keep you safe. And so what you do when you're climbing and you get to a place, what they call like a place you're gonna build an anchor, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take a few of these things and you're gonna put one piece over here, but you never wanna, it's unwise to just put one piece in and then just hang you and multiple friends' lives off of a single piece. That's an unwise way to live, right? And so what you do is you put one piece in, and then you put another piece in over here, and you put another piece over here, and you generally want to have 3. And then what you do is you take some rope, and you basically equalize all these different points of contact so that when you're hanging, you're never actually fully trusting in a single piece. You're kind of spreading your trust out between 3 things, and this is the safest way to climb. This is how you build an anchor. Everyone will kind of teach you this, and I'm kind of simplifying it a little bit, but that's one of the central things you learn is that it's an unwise thing to put your trust in a single piece of gear. Why? Because accidents happen, right? Rock crumbles. Even though this thing is really strong, sometimes gear breaks. And so it's unwise to just put your entire life into one single point of contact. Why? Because we live in a world of uncertainty. And I think this is a great metaphor for life, because this is one of the central things we learn growing up in this world. The world's wisdom says never entrust yourself to a single thing. Spread your trust among a few things. It's the same with investing, right? The very first thing you sit down with someone, you're like, I'm trying to invest some money, and you're like, how much do you have? You're like, not much, but a little bit, and I'm trying to invest this wisely. The very first thing an investment coach will tell you is what? Diversify. Why? Because it's foolish to entrust yourself fully to anything. Even things that you understand completely and are 100% rock solid investments like cryptocurrency and meme coins. Am I right? Okay, it's a joke. It's a joke. The wisdom of the world and the things we learn from a very, very young age, whether through inherited wisdom or just bumping into the realities of life, is that you learn you should never entrust yourself to one single thing. Spread out your trust amongst other things. It's the safest way to live. But there are times when you're climbing and you come across an anchor, bright, gleaming in the sun. You're coming over the edge. You're a little scared. You're about to build this thing, and it's hard to build these anchors. It's kind of sketchy. And all of a sudden, you see that there's someone who's come before you, a real professional, and they brought a drill up the side of this mountain. And they have drilled in these long holes in the rock. They've hammered in these stainless steel bolts into them, and they've hung a thick chain between these things. And you sometimes in climbing, you come across one of these. And it's amazing. I have to tell you, as someone who's like building anchors, it is amazing, because all of a sudden you're kind of stressed about placing this gear, doing it perfectly, and all of a sudden you come across an anchor that someone else has built. So what do you do when you come across one of those? Well, what you do is you clip into that and that only. You put your entire trust in that one thing. And if you try to add another piece, so if you come across an anchor and you clip into that and you go, well, I'm pretty confident in this, but I'm not totally confident in it. And so you start adding your own pieces. And so you actually spread out your trust between this anchor and your own piece. You hedge your bets. You actually end up being less safe than you would have just fully trusted the anchor. There are some situations in life where not trusting something fully, hedging your bets, actually places you in greater danger and is an unwise way to live. For instance, if you're walking on the ground and one foot is on cement, and then one foot is on like a rickety old rotten bridge, right? It doesn't really matter that one foot is on something utterly secure. If you spread your weight between these two things, what matters isn't how strong this point of contact is. What matters is how weak this point of contact is. Your life is like the same thing. It doesn't matter how strong God is as an anchor for your life if your trust is mixed between him and something else. The thing that really matters is, what is the point of greatest weakness in your life that you've chosen to trust, and that will determine the safety of your life and will determine how your life will go. Proverbs is giving wisdom to people on how to navigate life. And it doesn't say, hey, God's great. He's important. Religion matters. Spirituality matters. Therefore, God needs to be one of the main anchors of your life. It doesn't say that. It actually says, no, trust in the Lord with all your heart. It says, make God the one and only anchor of your life. Trust him completely. Trust the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. You see, wisdom begins when we realize that the Lord is far more trustworthy than ourselves. This is actually where kind of wisdom begins. Like the fear of the Lord, right, is the beginning. It draws us out of ourselves. And now it's applying that in the things of life. And it's saying we can't walk a path of wisdom unless you really intuitively believe deep down in your heart, God is smarter than I am. He cares more about me than I do. He has a better plan for my life than I do. He is wiser than I am. He is more trustworthy than I am with my own life. His words are a far more stable foundation for life than my own intuitions and perspectives. And so listen, if you spread yourself out between a few things, which is what I would say, this is the normal way I find people living. Even people in the church, they're like, man, Jesus is so important. But I'm wise. And so I'm not gonna put all my eggs in that basket. I'm gonna put 80%, 70%, 60%, but I am a wise person. And so I haven't invested my entire life in following God. I've invested my life in a few different ways. So in case this whole God thing doesn't pan out, I'm still gonna be safe and secure and okay. But if you spread out your trust between a few things, you choose to obey God in a few areas, and then you listen to another voice over here, and another voice over here. You sort of place your trust in a number of different voices. Ultimately, what you're trusting in is yourself. Right? You're trusting in your ability to kind of navigate the world and discern truth. And you go, hey, I think this part of the Bible's pretty good. This part of God's wisdom's pretty good. But then I got this one podcast that's kind of saying a different thing. I think this is like the right way to live when it comes to relationships. And I've got this other voice I've been watching on YouTube, and I think this is the right way to live and steward my finances. You actually have to ultimately choose to trust in one person. You either will trust the Lord or you will trust yourself. And wisdom comes to us and says you should trust Jesus more with your life than you trust yourself. The wise path is to trust God with your whole heart and lean not on your own understanding. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Why? Because you have a story and God has a story. And you have demonstrated again and again and again and again that you are a very unsafe person to trust with your life. And God has demonstrated again and again and again that he's always safe to trust your life to. You have a story, right? And I have a story. And the thing I've learned about myself is that sometimes I make some really great decisions for my life. Some decisions that benefit me, that help me flourish. Oftentimes, I make decisions that do not benefit my life. Have any of you ever made a decision that has not benefited your life before? Yeah. All of us, right? All of us have stepped into some situation, and with all of your creativity and wisdom and learning and knowledge, you have ran after something that caused you tremendous pain. All of us have done that. Sometimes it's a person we ran after. Sometimes it was a financial investment. Sometimes it was a person we really trusted. All of us have seen something in life and said, this is the path to life and flourishing. And it's turned out actually to be the path to ruin and destruction and pain and suffering and stress and anxiety. So we've demonstrated over and over and over in our own story that we actually cannot be trusted to discern the right path in life. But God also has a story. And God has demonstrated something very different with his story. It's really interesting. It doesn't just say trust God as like a big blanket statement of trust the divine one who's out there. It says trust in the Lord. Whenever you have like all lowercase L-O-R-D, it's basically putting that in place of the personal name for God in the Old Testament. So this is the personal name for God, Yahweh. This is the one who's been with God's people and proved himself faithful again and again and again. And so he's not saying, hey, put your trust in an abstract God you don't know because he's the creator. No, we're placing our trust in the God of the Bible. And this isn't an abstract God. It's not a distant God. It's not an idea of God. This is the God who's come near. This is the God who's come to the rescue. This God is personal. This is the God in the New Testament we find out actually put flesh and blood on and came to us in the person of Jesus Christ. And on the cross, Jesus demonstrated with crystal clarity that the safest place for your life, the safest place for your heart is not in your hands, but in his. And so this call of wisdom is saying, trust him completely. Don't lean on your own understanding. Don't think that you see things more clearly than God does. He does. He sees your life and your future perfectly clearly. And wisdom is actually demonstrated when you don't hedge your bets with God and something else. You just say, everything I have down at his feet, my whole life in his hands. He is the one anchor for my life. And this is what verse 8 says. It says, if we do this, if we trust him completely with our whole heart, it will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Are there any of you this morning who just walk in and you're like, it would be so great if I could find healing for my flesh, if I could find refreshment? I've met very few people who are walking through the world in 2025 who don't at some level feel tired and exhausted. And here wisdom comes to us and says, hey, actually, if you trust completely in God, throw yourself, your whole life in his hands, what will end up happening is healing for you. Because if you put your trust in anything other than God, you will end up enslaved to that thing. You will end up in an unsafe situation. You will end up with stress and anxiety and uncertainty. And even if God's 80% of what you got your life in, if 20% of your trust is in something else because you've hedged your bets, he's like, you're still never going to be totally healed. You're still never going to be totally refreshed. And so it's actually in this climactic act of not pseudo-faith, but true faith. He goes, there's something that happens where you get healed at a deep, deep level. So here's where he starts. He says, I want to call you to a complete, wholehearted trust in Jesus. Not in part, but in whole. I want to call you to burn the ships, get rid of the eject buttons. And I, as your pastor, I want to call you to actually get rid of all of the other areas of trust that you've smuggled into your discipleship with Jesus. Because if you're like me, I know you have some. So much of the first years of following Jesus was him putting his finger on things that he was like, hey, I think you trust me a lot, but you also really have put your trust in this thing. And if you don't actually get that trust away from this and put it on me, you're actually going to have a really anxious, stress-filled life. You're not going to be refreshed. You're not going to be totally healed because your trust is still going to be in that thing. And so much of the early years of me following Jesus was him again and again helping me identify where have I put my trust that's not in you, and him helping me become someone who trusts entirely in him. This is not something that just happens in a moment. It's a lifelong process. And to the extent that we learn to trust in God with our whole heart, is to this extent we walk as wisdom. And I do believe that Jesus is saying it will be refreshment to your bones if you live this way. So give him your whole heart, hold nothing back. But two of the places that are going to test our trust in the Lord the most are actually going to be in the high points of life and the low points. They're going to be in our wealth and in our trials. And so he wants to talk specifically about how do we trust God in those two places. So the first thing is this. He says that we are supposed to honor the Lord with our wealth. Read with me verses 9 and 10. So he says, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce, and then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. So he says, honor the Lord with your wealth. Honor is a really interesting word. If you've done a word study before in the Old Testament or kind of looked into this, honor, it's interesting. The root of the word is like to make something heavy. It's like weight is like the central idea of it. And here's what it's saying. Something will be honored. Something will be treated as weighty and important and valuable with your money, because that's what money does. Money communicates value, importance, and honor to things. And so the question is, what is going to be honored, or who is going to be honored with your wealth, your money? Now, usually if you're like a typical American, you use your money to honor yourself, right? We use our money to make much of our name, to surround ourselves with things that we want, to make our lives more comfortable. We honor ourselves with our wealth, but wisdom changes this. Because the wise person doesn't honor themselves with their money, they honor God. They use their money to make Jesus' name weighty in the world. They use their money actually to make him famous, important, and heap value on him. You use your wealth to honor and make weighty the Lord himself. Now, Hebrew, it's interesting, there's also an idea of the opposite of honor. You can, instead of treating something weighty, you can treat it lightly. You can treat something as though it has little importance, as though it's frivolous. And so you use your wealth, your money. It's one of the primary ways that the way that you communicate value and weight to things or you communicate that they are like frivolous or of secondary importance to you, right? This is why I think it's actually important when you're buying a wedding ring to not just go out and get like the cheapest thing possible because you want to be like a really wise steward of money. I think it's actually valuable to say, you know what? Actually, I shelled out for this. I didn't have enough money, so I gave plasma for 3 years so I could afford this blood diamond from my own blood I've been selling, right? It's like, it's actually kind of important because what you're doing is you're saying, I honor you. I see you as valuable and important. And so I actually want to make some kind of statement financially about how much I value you. If you are someone that's like, I love cars so much, and you are like, I bought a $400 rusted out piece of junk I don't really care about. I'm like, but do you really like cars? Right? The way you spend your money actually says a lot about what you really value and honor. I'm in this weird category where I like cars, but I don't have a nice car, so I'm trying to figure that out for me. Even as I said this, I'm like, I think I like cars, but I've chosen to buy a minivan instead. Okay. Money is one of the primary ways you communicate and put weight on something. Right, we understand this. Ray Ortland, he says this. He says, as God looks at your financial priorities, would he consider himself honored by you or slighted by you? You know, I'm always hesitant to teach about money. We don't pass an offering plate at Tree Line. We've never done that, by the way. Most of you are like, I don't even know how to give money here. I'm like, yeah, there's an offering box in the back half the time. You can go on our website, click give. But we don't pass an offering tray. We don't even talk about money that much. Actually, the first time we really talked about money was for Lent. And 2/3 of that, the money that we raised, was actually given outside the walls of Tree Line Church. And I'm hesitant to talk about money. I think it's one of the things that Jesus is actually poking at me and saying, hey, are you being a good pastor because you largely ignore this topic for your people? I'm worried that if I call you to live as an authentic follower of Jesus with your money, that you might not like what I say. Just gonna be honest, I'm worried about that. I'm worried you might get confused about my intentions because I understand there's so many religious organizations out in the world that prey on people's naivety and religious impulses to use them to get rich. I know that's a cultural touch point for people. I understand that's in the water, and everyone who comes in is kind of skeptical about organizations that ask you for money or tell you to be generous. But it's really interesting, Jesus was never nervous about that. He talked about money more than almost any other subject in the New Testament. Go read the Gospels. One of the primary things he talks about is money and how Christians use their money, how they spend their money. Why? Because our money is the primary way that we direct our heart towards things. And Proverbs says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Jesus in Matthew 6 says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So if we want to trust the Lord with all of our heart, one of the primary ways we will do that will actually be by honoring him with our wealth and with the first fruits of our produce. Now, I want to be clear here, just for all of you who are coming in, trying to figure out what does it look like to follow Jesus with my money. The primary way that we will communicate to ourselves, our family, and the world around us that Jesus is weighty and valuable and worthy is by using your money to make his name famous and important in the world. It's the primary way. And I think actually one of the significant challenges for the church in America is we want to do so much evangelism and tell the world that Jesus is valuable, but when they poke their head into our lives, what they find is we actually still value most the same things they value most. Cars, houses, comforts, vacations, beaches, mountains. And so we have this weird tension where you poke your head into the church in America and it's like we say Jesus is valuable, but then often our checkbooks, we're heaping honor on something else other than Jesus. Something else gets the first fruits of our wealth. But he says, no, you give God your first fruits. What is a first fruit? Well, a first fruit, very simply, is this. It's your first and best. So super practical, it's just this, it's tithing. You know, I've heard a lot of people talk about this. They say, well, tithing is an Old Testament thing, not a New Testament thing. Old Testament's commanded, the New Testament, it is not commanded in the same way. And that's correct. That's true. In the Old Testament, tithing is commanded. You're supposed to give 10% of your kind of whatever God gave you, like the full gross amount. God gave you, take 10% of that kind of to the temple. You're supposed to take another percentage, give here. It ended up being about 20 to 22% all in, that God was saying, hey, I'm requiring you to be generous and give to my kingdom this amount of money. But 10% was like the tithe that you basically gave to the temple. And it's true, there's no kind of direct correlation in the New Testament that says you have to give 10% to your local church. But it's interesting, these commands in the Old Testament, they happened before God incarnated himself into the world as a human being and died on a cross for your sins. And so I talk with people sometimes, and they're like, well, that's an Old Testament thing. And I'm like, yeah, that was when the primary thing going on was you'd bring a goat or a lamb, and that was the blood that would be shed, in some sense, to atone for your sins. Now the fullness of that has come, and actually you go, no. Actually, the real substance for your sins and atonement is the blood of the Son of God. Do you think that people who are in that story should be more or less generous? Far more. Far more. And so, yeah, there's no direct translation in the New Testament that says you should give 10% of what you make. But here's the pattern that I've seen in my life. Every single, and I literally mean every single wise, mature follower of Jesus who I've looked at their life and said, I think I want to be like you, they have always tithed. Without exception, 100%. There's not a single person I've looked at and I go, your life is marked by wisdom, and then I find out they're not giving 10% to their local church. They just did. They gave 10% of whatever they made before they paid taxes or took money out for a 401k. They just took everything that God had given them, and they took the first fruits of that and said, I'm giving at least 10% back to God straight away as a minimum, not as something to aspire to, but just as the baseline. And most of them gave much more than that. So I just want you to know that every single wise, mature Christian that I have ever met in my life has always done that. So early on, me and Stevie just said, if we want to be wise, we should just at least do that, right? And so I would just encourage you, if you're someone that's like, I want to be someone who's wise, I would say that is like a really practical ground floor practice you should begin to develop today. Tithing wasn't a negotiable thing for these people. It's not a negotiable thing for us. Why? Because I'm trying to be wise. And wise people honor God with their wealth. They give him their first fruits. First fruits, another way to think of it is this: you honor God first. You place them as priority number one in your budget, right? So you get a budget, God gives you some wealth, and for some of you, you're like, I work at Starbucks, so it's a certain amount of wealth. Some of you are like, I'm a pretty significant player in this large company. God's giving you a lot more wealth. But it's just whatever your first fruits are, you take that, you give it to God. And so what it means is that God is the number one priority for you in your budget. And after that, you give to the government. After that, you pay for your mortgage. After that, you buy food. Because why? Because God is the one who gets the central place of honor with what you've been given in your life. Most people, we honor ourselves first, and we see if there's anything left over for God. Proverbs is saying, that's a really foolish way to interact with the one who gave you all that money. It's a foolish way to interact with the one who has invested in you with that money. Listen, every dollar that comes to you is an investment in you by God. You didn't make the money. You didn't find the money. God's in control of everything. God determines where every single penny on planet Earth is going to be. And so anything that you get, even if you worked really hard and built a business and grinded, that is in your bank account because God believed he wanted to make an investment in you. So when you demonstrate that you use money to honor God and you give him your first and your best, you demonstrate yourself to be a good investment. And God is not foolish, God is wise. And so when God sees a good investment, normally he invests more. And the way the Proverbs says that is it says, hey, if you honor God with your wealth, with the first fruits of your produce, then your vats will overflow with wine. Your barns will be filled with plenty. This passage isn't meant to stir up greed. But it's just true. God tests his servants to see if they will be faithful with little so that he can know who to entrust with more. Man, I just want you to know, there are some stories in this room of insane generosity. Like even during the Lent stuff that we just got done, like I remember just like briefly seeing, like we're trying to put together as elders, like, okay, how much do we have to spend to these organizations and kind of do this? Some of the stories in this room of people just saying like, Jesus is amazing, I'm just gonna cut a huge check to whatever he wants to do with this. Like it stirred my faith. I remember sitting down with someone, I was just like, hey, are you like, sure? Like, are you, like, we wanted you to be generous, but like, do you have any money left? Like, are you okay? Like, and I just remember like having these conversations with people and feeling in my heart like, oh my gosh, Jesus is incredible. And so like me as a pastor, I'm watching people's generosity and the way they're honoring God. It's telling me an amazing story about Jesus. And if it's telling me that, the guy whose job it is to read the Bible and tell you how amazing Jesus is, it's probably doing that like crazy to your own heart, your family's heart, and the people around you. And so I just want you to know that this room is filled with some insanely generous people who are honoring God with your wealth. It makes me so stinking proud to be your pastor if you're in the room and that's your story. Here's the other thing I'll say quickly. Most churches are filled with like 20% of people who are wildly generous. They wildly honor God. And then about 80% of the rest of the room honors themselves with their wealth. And so I just want you to know this, okay? This is just true across the board in almost every single church in America, that most of the big objectives that the church leaders are trying to go forward to, the gap between where they're at and what they want to accomplish, like so much of it is simply just if every Christian just tithed. So like if every single person in this room who was a follower of Jesus tithed, we could afford a building tomorrow. That's just true. The reality is a lot of you don't tithe. A lot of you don't honor God with your wealth. And listen, I'm excited you're here. I'm glad you're here. I love being able to preach the gospel to you free of charge. You're never gonna pay, we're never gonna have some membership fee to be part of Treeline Church, right? But the thing is, I want for you to have the opportunity to become someone who's wise. And wise people honor God with their wealth. Here's the last thing, he says this. Verse 11, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. So this is the third thing he wants to say. Do not despise the Lord's discipline. Do not despise the Lord's discipline. There's two primary areas of life that are going to test your trust in God. One is when God gives you plenty. The question, are you going to trust him in your wealth? And the question is when God removes things from your life and brings you into a place of difficulty and scarcity. And so he says, do not despise the Lord's discipline. Maybe your translation says reject. So it's like there's gonna be a season that might come into your life where the Lord is disciplining you. He's withdrawing things from you to actually help shape you into a different kind of person. And he says, hey, don't despise the Lord's discipline when it comes. Don't be weary of his reproof, but entrust yourself to the Lord even in your suffering. And the thing he's saying is this. He's saying in that moment, God has not abandoned you, but he is disciplining you. And he's actually using even these difficult things in the world, things that are not things he wants to be true about the world, but just things that are true because this world is broken and filled with evil. But God at times even uses those things to shape us into a person of destiny. Here's how John 15 says it. Jesus says, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser. And every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. But every branch that does bear fruit, meaning every branch that seems to be a good investment, seems to be something where when God invests in it, more comes out of it, bears fruit. He says every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it may bear more fruit. And so this is actually the life of a Christian, right? You are not just people who in of our own selves, we bear fruit. Actually, we become connected to Jesus. He is the true vine, and we become kind of grafted onto him. And then now through the power of the Spirit, there's this new life at work with us. We begin to bear fruit. And when God sees that fruit, he goes, yes, this is a real child, a real son, a real daughter of mine. And then he comes close and begins to prune and cut away things that shouldn't be there, so that more fruit can grow. The one that we're placing our trust in is the Lord. He isn't abstract. He isn't distant. He also doesn't leave us as we are. And this is actually one of the reasons you can trust him, because he cares enough about you to come close, to get his hands dirty, and to actually fight with you at times to help make you into the person that you want to be. The one person who loves you enough to do this at all times is Jesus Christ. You can't prune from a distance. God doesn't prune by kind of large-scale forest management, setting a fire and seeing what lasts. No, he comes close. He prunes. You can't prune from a distance. The only way you can prune something is to get up right there and know it intimately and know exactly where to cut, exactly what to cut off and what to keep. And so we have a Father in heaven who loves us enough actually to at times discipline us and prune us. And listen, the only way that God could get close enough to us to do the work necessary was actually to become a human being and join himself to us. So this is, if you understand, this is a God who cares so deeply about your transformation, so deeply about you being changed into a person of wisdom that can live a beautiful life, that God himself was like, I can't do this from a distance, so I have to become a human being, become joined to this person so that I can walk with them and help discipline them and change them into my own image. Wisdom, in some sense, can be defined as placing your trust in trustworthy things. On the cross, the God who came from heaven down to earth has demonstrated to us that he is completely trustworthy in every single area of our life. And so if we want to be people who grow in wisdom, if we want to be people who find our way through the world in a way that actually leads to the least amount of pain, not against the grain of the universe, but with the grain of the universe, one of the primary things we're going to have to grow in is learning to trust God with our heart instead of trusting ourselves. It's actually going to be having to honor him with the things he's given us instead of just honoring ourselves. And even when we're in that very dark, difficult place where there's suffering, we actually entrust our lives not in our own hands, because we find our own hands to be kind of untrustworthy, but we trust our lives into the hands of the one who bled and died for us. Hands that bear the marks of his love for us, whose scars on his body tell us to trust him even in the hardest moments of our life. And Proverbs begins by saying, this is the path of wisdom. This is it. It's a deep, relentless, wholehearted trust in God where your whole heart is fallen on him in trust. And in the high points and in the low points, we learn to be people of wisdom as we trust God. Let me pray for us. God, I love how practical these verses are for me. I think there's so many moments in my life where I just run up against something in the Bible that I disagree with. And I have my own wisdom, my own thinking, my own emotions, my own heart, and I have to make a choice about whether I am going to trust in you or I'm going to trust in myself. And God, you have demonstrated to me on the cross that you are more trustworthy than I am. You have demonstrated to me without a shadow of doubt that you are the one I want to place my trust in. Jesus, I trust in you. We trust in you. God, when we run into these things, would you make us people who are wise? People who do not lean on our own understanding, but in all our ways we acknowledge you. And so, God, would you help us become people who honor you rightly with our wealth? Would you help us become people who, even in our suffering, we entrust ourselves to you, even in those places? God, make us wise. In your name.